Up until quite recently, all of the footage that I filmed on my phone looked pretty terrible, and the footage I shot on action cameras was usually noisy and over-sharpened, really unusable. But since then, technology has advanced, so this week I'm testing out some small cameras and phones to find out the best settings and situations for pocket-sized cameras. Now, even though I usually shoot with bigger cameras, there are still so many situations where having a little camera that you can pull out and grab some quick footage is absolutely crucial, whether it's for filming documentaries, behind the scenes, travel, or sports footage. So let's see what we can do to help the little cameras keep up with the big cameras, and maybe even replace them. The first thing I've noticed when filming on any small camera, whether it's an action camera, a drone, or even one of the latest smartphones, it's clear to me that they need a lot of light or else the image gets very grainy. But that's not all. In order to avoid noise on these cameras, it's absolutely vital to set the exposure correctly. On a smartphone, we can tap on the screen to adjust the brightness of the image, or use the Filmmaking Pro app for more precision. But either way, the goal for me is to avoid underexposing the image. Because if we shoot underexposed, it will look okay dark, but if we try and brighten the image in editing software, the footage gets really grainy, even if we filmed on a bright sunny day. So generally, we're better off overexposing the image on smartphones, and the same goes for the DJI Osmo Pocket, and most smaller cameras for that matter. In my test, I found the image looks cleanest when we overexpose by at least one stop, and then darken it in post. So how do we set the exposure? Well, whether it's a smartphone or any other little camera, the key thing is to get it out of automatic mode and take the ISO setting down all the way. Then set the shutter speed to whatever gets you closest to 1/48 without making the image so bright that we lose lots of highlight detail. Because if it's too bright, we can try and fix it with software, but that detail is never coming back. Now, just so you know, I did ask DJI if they could loan me some of their pocket-sized products to try out, but I told them they couldn't control what I say in this video or even see it before it goes public. So they said yes, and here we are. Anyway, for the classic cinematic look, we would want our shutter speed set around 1/48 most of the time, but with these little cameras, that's usually not possible in bright situations. Now, we could buy ND filters to block out some of the light as it comes into the lens, or just wait for it to get darker outside. But if we can't do either of those, then we're just going to have to accept that the movement in our footage is going to look a little bit choppy. Now, unless we're running low on storage space, it's usually best to record in the highest possible resolution. And if we're shooting with Filmmaking Pro, we can choose the Filmic Extreme mode, which gives us slightly more data to work with. I'll shoot in 24 frames per second, unless I'm planning to shoot in slow motion, which would require a higher frame rate. For example, this shot was filmed in 60 frames a second on the Osmo Pocket, and since I'm uploading this on Valentine's Day, I thought I'd use the example shots in this video as a chance to recreate some classic romantic film moments to see what we can learn from them. Our first rom-com cliche is the slow motion point of view shot when a character first sees the person they're about to fall in love with. The slow motion helps to give the audience the overwhelming, heightened feeling that the character is experiencing of infatuation or love at first sight. So how do we capture this shot? Well, it's pretty simple. Just point the camera as if it's seeing what the character is seeing and shoot in slow motion. You can make it even more cliche by having wind-swept hair, which you can create by using a leaf blower or by simply filming on a windy day like we did. Now, I reckon this shot is a good example of the first reason why filmmakers should know about cliches, so that we can avoid using them in our work. To me, I think this shot has been done just too many times, even as a parody, let alone as a serious romantic moment. But then again, I wouldn't be surprised if in the next 5 years we have a film that uses a shot like this in a really tasteful and genuine way, because, you know, there's no rules in filmmaking. So once we've got our exposure and frame rate, I like to make sure the white balance is in manual mode so that it's not constantly adjusting in the middle of our shot. Plus, we can always use the white balance to purposefully make a shot look a little bit warmer or cooler, as I did here to give the shot a kind of sunset look. Now, if possible, I think it's best to turn down any kind of in-camera sharpening that these cameras do. For me, these little 4K cameras have plenty of detail, and I think the cinematic look is actually a little bit softer. Similarly, I like to turn down the contrast a little bit. On the Osmo Pocket, I can change the color setting to D-Cine-like, which makes the footage look like this, and then I can color grade it to look like this. Now, you can pay extra on the Filmic Pro app to get a similarly flat profile, but to be honest, I've always just graded the standard image from the phone. Okay, so that's definitely enough chat about settings, because there's still a lot more we can do to improve our footage. First up is making sure the footage is in focus. On a phone you can use manual focus, but it's a little bit fiddly on a touchscreen. So I usually just tap to focus and then tap it again to lock it. This shot and a couple of the others were actually a bit out of focus, and I didn't notice until after I'd finished shooting. So it's really important to look closely at the screen while you're filming. And that brings us to our next romantic movie cliche, which is characters staring aimlessly out the window on public transport when they're unhappy or lonely. So while this is a pretty common shot in movies, I don't actually think it's too cliche. I could imagine using it in the right scene at the right moment. But why do filmmakers so often choose to put their unhappy characters on public transport? My guess is that it's the stillness of the character just sitting with nothing to do but watch the windows go by. Both the audience and the character just watch the world whiz past, which really brings out that feeling of helplessness. Okay, so the next thing to think about is stabilization. Our footage will probably be shaky if we shoot handheld, especially on a lightweight phone or camera. The simplest, cheapest thing to do is to get a selfie stick attachment and stick it on a tripod or mini ball head on a light stand. Now we can position the camera and keep it steady. But as soon as we add a tripod or stand, we've lost some of the pocket-sized flexibility of these small cameras. If we want to stay flexible, then a gimbal like this DJI Osmo Mobile can help smooth out most of those little shakes, so long as you keep your hands generally steady. The Osmo Pocket is similar, but it has its own camera with a built-in gimbal, and that's what I used for this shot, which is romantic cliche number 3, rushing through airports or stations. To be honest, I personally can't imagine writing a romantic airport scene anytime soon. It's just been done so many times already. But I think there's something we can learn from that, because there has to be a reason why it's so popular. I guess there is inherent drama in the idea of a couple who have been separated or reunited in an airport. Why does that matter? Well, I think it's a classic example of empathy and conflict, which are two of the real cornerstones of cinematic storytelling. Now, the old-fashioned way to film a shot like this would be to lay down some dolly tracks and have a big camera that rolls across those tracks, which is very precise and smooth, but it takes a long time to set up and it's pretty expensive. The fact that I can take a camera out of my pocket, connect it to my phone, and film some pretty smooth footage within seconds is pretty cool. You just have to remember to do a kind of weird walk, bending your knees to keep the footage stable. Because if not, there is sometimes a kind of bobbing effect with each footstep. So what I've seen from this footage is that with any camera, the settings aren't everything. These two shots were filmed with identical settings, but the light's direction makes them look dramatically different. I think this shot has a lot more life than this one, simply because we filmed in a different location. And I think this shot would have far less depth if the camera was filming in this direction, instead of facing where you can see the horizon off in the distance. So are small cameras better than big cameras? Well, they have their benefits and they have their shortcomings. So it depends on what we're filming. If you know how to use these cameras and can put them in the right situation, then they are definitely very powerful storytelling tools. And finally, just to go back to those movie cliches, I think it's worth noting that even some of the most overused and cheesy filming techniques tend to be rooted in the characters' emotions and the conflict of the story. So if we really want cinematic footage, then yes, we can test the settings and use color grading, but we shouldn't forget that it's what we're actually filming that makes the difference. My name's Cade, this has been DSLRguide, and I'll see you next time.